Hello, so here we've got a translation to go into English from the 2019 AQA German GCSE exam paper, reading paper. So, what can we do here? Well, if we've got 9 marks and it's 9 chunks, I would look for the main subject and the main verbs first of all. So if we look here, we have got mein Onkel wohnt. I would scan it and read it through, just get the gist of what it's about. We know that it's about family. We look at the context at the beginning. If we keep going, we've got the main verbs. We've got vormittags, so we've got the time phrases. Fährt mit der Straßenbahn zur Bank. Then we look at the clauses. So you've got your question word stroke linking word here, where, connective. So we know that those types of words, where do the main verbs go? They get sent to the end. So we've got the main subject again is but we know that the main verb has gone to the end as opposed to second. Looking again, we've got obwohl. There's the but where's the main verb going to go? We know it's not second there, is it? It's now been sent to the end. Ist. And it's a verb, comma verb structure, so let's have a look. So we've got the again, but the verb is here. And keep going. In der Zukunft mit seiner Familie ans Mittelmeer umziehen. Now what have we got at the end? Often look at the end, we've got the infinitive. Why? Because we've got a modal verb here. And then if we go in the last sentence, for, so that could be a preposition in front of, but it's in front of a time phrase. So we know that for in front of a time phrase means ago, and so keep looking. We know that the verb is the second idea, not necessarily the second word. Who's the subject? Sie. Now, is it they or is it she? Well, let's look at the verb that's second idea. It's haben, so it can't be she, it would have to be they. It can't be you because there's no capital S. Now, we've got the main verb there that's the second idea, not the second word, because here's the time phrase. For ein paar Monaten. Haben is there. Now let's again always look to the end just to check the tense. And then we've got gekauft. So what kind of word begins with GE and ends in a T? It's an action done, and it's at the end of the sentence there. So key things really. Look for the tenses. How do we know the tenses? Look for time phrases. And what we said at the beginning was look for the main subject of each sentence and the main verb. Now we know that the main verb normally goes second, but of course we know that the main verb can be changed position if it's got words such as subordinating conjunctions or question words, relative clauses that send the main verb to the end. And we know that if those words like the obwohl, for example, or wenn, etc. come at the beginning of 2 clauses, then we know that those main verbs will be verb, comma, verb. Now we know also when we've got the main verb, we need to think about the tense and the type of verb. So the verb type. Yep, so we know that we went back, didn't we, here to the past, we had a bit of haben, but it could have been present tense, but we look to the end and there's the GE and T. And we also know from the time phrase what tense it is. So think about tenses and time phrases, subject and main verb. And we know from the main verb here, if we go back to this one, will, that the main verb is will. It's a false friend. It doesn't mean will, it means want, doesn't it? From wollen, to want. It's a modal verb. And we know that verb types, that modal verbs need to have an infinitive. And where do infinitives normally go? Infinitives normally go at the end. Except that then the modal verb could be sent to the end. It depends whether it's going to be second or last. So those are the key things. So if this is the reading paper, we've got 9 chunks, 9 marks here for this one. But always look at the mark scheme and think about how many marks it's giving you. But even if it weren't a 9-mark question, if it were just a translation and a reading text, for example, my advice stands that you look for the subject of each sentence, the main verb. We know it's normally second, but it could be at the end. If the verb is second, look to the end and see what other kind of verbs there are, an infinitive perhaps, or a past participle, an action done, and what are the clues. We also know we need to look at the main vocabulary. Now, that comes down to you learning your topic vocabulary, maybe using Quizlet or BBC Bite Size or Good Language Skills, Languages Online, or Caboodle Vocabulary. So let's look for the main nouns now. So we know that nouns in German have a capital letter. Maybe also look for the prepositions, but let's focus on the nouns. We've talked about verbs. Verbs was the first step, wasn't it? Second, and then with the time phrases. Second, I would then go for the nouns. And we know that nouns, they have a capital letter. So we've got Einfamilienhaus, we've got Vorort, Großstadt, vormittags. Now that's also time phrase, it's also a noun. Straßenbahn and Bank. Jahren. What else? Zukunft, Familie, Mittelmeer, Monaten, and Haus. Now we know, don't we, with German, that we can whack a few nouns together to make what we call a compound noun. It could be 1, 2, or 3. If we look at this first one, we've got ein, Familie, and Haus. So house of the one family. Well, cultural corner, we know that in Germany that often you have lots of Generationen, lots of generations living in one house, but we would call a one family house will be a detached house. This one, Ort means place, and vor is in front of, so in Vorort, what could it be? Well, it'd be like a suburb. If you think about it, it's a part of, a Vorort of a Großstadt. A Stadt is a town. A Großstadt, what's a big town? It's a city. What is a Hauptstadt if Haupt is main? Hauptstadt is capital city. Okay, so you've got Stadt, Großstadt, Hauptstadt. This one, we know that vor means in front of, or in front of a time phrase. We talked about it can mean ago, a few months. But if it's in front of, Mittag, Mitte is middle, Tag is day, so middle of the day. What's in front of the middle of the day? Or noon. In front of the noon is morning, in the mornings. So we've got our time phrases. What about this one? Bahn is a synonym for Zug, like train. And Straße is street. So thinking about street train, what would we call it? We would call it a tram. This one we've got it could be a singular or plural. So when you're thinking about your nouns, think about if they're singular, think about if they're plural, and think about gender, number, and case. So gender, number, case. What changes the gender number? What changes the case? Well, it could be a preposition. So if we think about our third thing, look for prepositions. Yep. Think about flamingos, where it's movement or no movement, perhaps, or ones that always take the dative, bei mit einer Französizeit gegenüber, or the ones that always take accusative, fudgebow, like für and über. But the flamingo ones are movement and no movement, aren't they? So, for example, we think about in. In is the preposition in. Is there movement or no movement if the house is saying where it's situated? Well, in einem, and we know that there is the dative. But the thing is, going into English, we don't need to worry about the gender, number, and case necessarily, because what we need to do, translating into our mother tongue, our Muttersprache English, is we might need to think about the syntax. So you need to think about either changing words around, the word order changes, the syntax, the word order. You might need to think about taking out words because, and we call that translation by omission. And we're looking for a natural sounding translation, but what we do need to do is not be too dynamic. Dynamic equivalence is where you're making things sound really natural, and it could be paraphrasing, but we need to be careful with that in the exam context. Yes, of course, you could do that in everyday life, but in the exam context, the exam board wants to know that you know to change the word order. You need to know that you know your prepositions, that you know your specific vocabulary. Okay, so we've got our prepositions. We know, if we go back to green for prepositions, that we know that sometimes prepositions do not literally translate. So here, for example, we know that mit is with, but we wouldn't say with the tram. Well, we could say with the tram, but we would probably say by tram. We know that zu and der is squashed, zur. So we know that with prepositions and nouns always have a determiner or article before them, unlike in English, which is why we might need to take them out. We wouldn't necessarily say in the, for example, we might say the just in. We know that the weird thing is with jobs and nationalities and things in German is that unlike normally having nouns with determiners or articles before them, that we don't use them. So, for example, that's why JFK said, I am a donut. He said, ich bin ein Berliner. He should have just said, ich bin Berliner. So that's the opposite of what we normally need to think about. German normally has nouns with determiners or articles before them. We know that with prepositions, we can and often do squash where we can. So we go back to our preposition zu, zu, always takes the dative. And it's squashed the determiner in front of the word bank. Now, what word goes into der in the dative? Because zu always takes the dative. Yep, that's right, die. So die Bank, but zu, we can't say zu die Bank because die goes to der in the dative. So it squashes zu and der, zur. Think about this one as well. So this is a preposition in. It's a flamingo preposition where it can be movement or no movement, accusative or dative. And D goes to der in the dative, so in the future. But the thing is, though, we just need to recognise it as the word the if we're going into English. We're not producing German in this context. It's just a thought for your writing or speaking preparation. So let's think about this. Main subjects, let's recap. Read for gist, you know the context, familia, okay. Find the main subject and the main verb in each of the sentences. Find the time phrases to give yourself a clue about the tenses. Now, one little thing for stretch and challenge, there are a couple of contexts where you don't translate into the same tense. If there were this word, seid, it's not in this one, but it comes up a lot. Seid in German takes the present tense. So in this reading translation, you would be looking for a present tense verb. But in English, it would translate into the past. So seid can mean for or since. Now, interestingly, it could be replaced maybe with vor ein paar Monaten. It could be I've been living here for a few months, in which case it wouldn't be past, it would be the present tense. So if you're saying I have been living in London, or I have lived in London, that's past tense in English. But in German, you would use seid with the present. So what's I live? Ich wohne. Ich wohne. And what's a synonym for ich wohne? Ich lebe. So this is if you're producing your German. But seid comes up a lot in the translations into English from German because it is a higher level thing showing that you know that the present tense verb in German would translate into the past in English. So in seit, ich wohne in London seit 10 Jahren or seit 10 Jahren or seit ein paar Monaten wohne ich in London. So that's present tense, seit ein paar Monaten. Again, it's taking the dative there. So we wouldn't say I am living since a few months in London. If it were that one, you would say I have lived or I have been living in London for a few months or since a few months, but we would probably say for a few months. So I'm just picking out this time phrase just because that equally could be seit, but then it wouldn't be past tense, it would be present tense. But translating into English, what would it go to? It would go into the past tense, okay? So that's just a little stretch and challenge plus to do with time phrases as well. Okay, so if we were to think about the translation, how would we go into that? Well, have a think about it. It could be this. Yep. So how about mein Onkel wohnt in einem Einfamilienhaus. My uncle lives in a detached house. AQA would accept one family or detached house. It would reject in a one family house. That's too specific. What about in einem Vorort der Großstadt? Now you've got the genitive there, possession of the. Die goes to what in the genitive as well as the dative? It goes into der. So it would be in einem Vorort der Großstadt. Alles klar? Okay. And you've got der Großstadt. Okay, let's point to those bits there. So my uncle lives in a detached house in einem Vorort der Großstadt. So sometimes you need to look to the end to see what we're going to do, and it would translate in a suburb of a or the city. Now you could say on the edge of the city, like am Stadtrand, R-A-N-D, on the outskirts of the city. It wouldn't accept surroundings or capital city. That's not a Großstadt, that is a Hauptstadt. Alles klar? Okay, vormittags fährt mit der Straßenbahn zur Bank. Straßenbahn zur Bank. In the mornings, he travels or goes by tram to the bank. Wouldn't accept by rail, could be with the tram, could be before noon or midday, or each and every morning. Okay, so we've got that there. Oops-a-daisy. Vormittags fährt mit der Straßenbahn zur Bank. Wo seit einigen Jahren arbeitet. So remember that with the wo we have to look to the end, okay, to see what the verb is happening, where he has worked for several years. Now I mentioned about the seit, didn't I? So although I've just talked about it here, look, it's here, seit. So let's go back to our time phrases and think, okay, red time phrase, seit, yeah, here is the seit, there is the verb. Now that's present tense, isn't it? But in English, what would we translate it as? We would translate it as where he has worked, or where he has been working as well. Alright, next one. Obwohl ziemlich glücklich ist, although he is quite, fairly, pretty, rather, reasonably, any of those really. Happy, glücklich. They would accept prosperous, fortunate, lucky, because glücklich could mean either of those. Will in der Zukunft, okay, will in der Zukunft, let's go here, will in der Zukunft mit seiner Familie ans Mittelmeer umziehen. Let's break it down. Will in der Zukunft, and that would translate as what? Where he wants, and then you need in the future, but we need to add a little bit in, to move house or to move to the Mediterranean with his family. To move to the Mediterranean with his family. And the verb umziehen, yes, it can mean to change your clothes. Anything with has got change or around, and ziehen is to pull. But it also means to move house or to move. Mittelmeer, the Mediterranean, is the Middle Sea, literally, with his family. Okay, and then coming towards the end, so it's a little bit blurry, I'm afraid. Right, so then we've got vor ein paar Monaten haben sie dort ein Haus gekauft. And we would translate that as where, so a few months ago is the time phrase, or a couple of months ago, would reject several months. That's mehrere. Mehrere is several. I'll write that down here at the top. Here, mehrere. Mehrere is several. All right, that is not a few months ago. That's the word several. Okay, mehrere. Where they bought, not brought. That's B-R-O-U-G-H-T. That's in bringen. But bought as in to buy. Kaufen. Kaufen goes to gekauft. Where they bought a house. Now, last thing, but very important, sehr wichtig. All right, this word here. I'm going to go into it and pick out in black, schwarz, dort. All right, this is why when I talk about chunking up and maybe number chunking, the dort, if you missed out the dort, which is a synonym of da, D-A, not da as in because, but D-A, just there, it means there, dort drüben, over there, da drüben, over there. If you miss out the dort, you wouldn't get the mark, because they bought a house, brilliant, you got that, but you need the word there. Now, AQA would accept here, but it's needing some sort of allusion, alluding to the fact that it's a house somewhere, not just bought a house, all right? So when I talk about chunking up, do take the advice of chunking up this source text of what you're translating from, chunk up your target text of what you're translating into, and then compare chunk by chunk. So mein Onkel wohnt in einem Einfamilienhaus. So it's all going a bit haywire, isn't it? Okay, Einfamilienhaus. You then go to your English chunk and think, okay, have I got all of the key details there? And this last sentence, you'll have chunked up your target text here, all right? And then, let's go back, and then you'll have chunked it up so that when you're going little by little in this last sentence, you wouldn't just say they bought a house a few months ago. you'd say they bought a house a few months ago there, or they bought a house there a few months ago, with your syntax changing. And we talked about syntax, didn't we, up here? All right, I hope that helps. Take care. Bye. Alles Gute.